Previously learned. Welcome to today's lesson on the nested if function. You would have previously learned about a basic if function where you were given two options, true or false. And the basic if function allows you to replace the true and false given by the logical test by something that's a little bit more meaningful. So, for example, a basic if would look like this. If, and I'm just going to throw out a logical test. If cell B2 is greater than cell B3, if that is true, instead of saying the word true, I'm going to say option 1. And if that is false, instead of saying false, I'm going to say option 2. And we close off the if function. But where the nested if function comes in is if we have more than two options. So anytime you're looking at more than two options, you know that you are now looking at a nested if. So if you have three options, you need at least two logical tests. If you have four options, you will need three logical tests. And if you have five options, you will need four logical tests. If you're looking at more than five options, then you probably should not be using the if function. And instead, you need to look at using a VLOOKUP function. So let's look at what the nested if function looks like, because the nested if function is an if function within the if function. And where that second if function comes in is in the false value. That's where you will start your second if. But remember, when you are writing functions in Excel, you only need one equal sign. So you are writing everything except for the equal sign in that second if. And in my examples today, I am not using the equal sign because I just want you to be able to clearly see what those formulas look like. All right, so let me give you an example here. If there were three options, and I'm just going to call them option 1, option 2, and option 3. We automatically know that option 3 is going to be our false value. So keep that in mind. We do not need a logical test for the third option. Okay, we only need a logical test for option 1 and option 2. So this is what a 3 option if function is going to look like. I'm going to go if, open my parentheses, B2 is greater than B3. If that is true, yes, we want to say option 1, comma. Now we come to the false value, but we cannot just say the false value is option 2, because where does option 3 come in? And how do we make the determination if the person, or if we want option 2 or option 3 shown? We must now ask another question of the cell. We've already determined if the cell is greater than B3, we want option 1, but what if the cell is not greater than B3? We then need to ask a second question. And this is where the second if comes in. So we replace that false value with another if. And so I start again. If, same cell we're testing, B2 is less than now B3, then what do we want if that is true? We want option 2. And what do we want if B2 is not greater than B3 and not less than B3? Then automatically we know we're going with that last option, which is our false option, option 3. And so you would have fulfilled all of the options, option 1, option 2, and option 3. And at the end, I closed off this if function but I still left the first if function open, and that if function needs to be closed as well. So a little trick here, what you can do is just count how many times you have written the word if. So I have if 1, 2 times. That means at the end of my if function, I should have 1, 2 parentheses to close off the function. Okay, so let's do it now with 4 options. So remember now our 4th option is going to end up being my false value, and I do not need to write a logical test for that value, because once we have concluded that it is not option 1, 2, or 3, we know that it's automatically going to be option 4. So no need to write a logical test. So let's try it again. So with 4 options, we're going to now have 3 logical tests. And we go equal if, of course, I'm not writing the equal for your benefit. Again, if B2 is greater than B3, that is true, we want option 1. If that is false, then we need to figure out which of the 3 options that are left do you want. And we start our if again in that false place. We go if, then B2 is less than B3. If that is true, we're going to go with option 2. And if that is not true, again, we are replacing the false value here. We need to ask a third question. If it's not greater than and is not less than, maybe it is less than and equal to. So let's go if again. If B2 is maybe less than equal to B3, then this time I want to go, if this is true, with option 3. And if none of those are true, we are going to go with the automatic false value of option 4. And we count our ifs. We have 1, 2, 3 ifs. So we end with 1, 2, 3 parentheses. Okay? Now let's look at option 5. So clearly you can see here that it quickly becomes cumbersome as you start increasing the number of options that you have. That's why I said if you have more than 5 options, you probably should not be using an if function. It may just be better for you to use a VLOOKUP function, which we're going to learn after we are done with nested ifs. So let's look at what a 5 option if function is going to look like. So again, we go if B2 is greater than B3. If that is true, we go with option 1. If that is not true, we have to ask another question. Is it then that B2 is less than B3? And if that is true, we're going to go with option 2. And if that is not true, then we want to know if B2 is less than equal to B3. And if that is true, we're going to go with option 3. And if that is not true, then we want to know if, again, if B2 is maybe greater than equal to B3. And if that is true, we're going to go with option 4. And if it is not true, we go with the last option that we do not need to write a logical test for, option 5. And again, I go back and I count my ifs. 1, 2, 3, 4 ifs. So I close 1, 2, 3, 4 parentheses, and that ends my if function. So in a nutshell, that is what the nested if looks like. Now, I cannot promise you that you will never see a nested if with 5 options, but you will rarely see this. You will, on another hand, see a nested if with 3 to 4 options quite often. So you must make sure that you are familiar with these 2 examples for sure, and understand the way that the nested if function works so that you will not be confused despite however many options that you have. All right, so let's look at a real example. So here I have a flight schedule, and I have the seat capacity of each of these flights. And then on the other column, I have all the amount of seats that have been sold on the flights. So let's look at what we're trying to test here. It says if the ticket sold is equal to the seat capacity, then the flight is full. If the ticket sold is less than the seat capacity, we have space available. And if the ticket sold is more than the seat capacity, then the flight is overbooked. And because I have these 3 options in my spreadsheet, I am going to use the cell addresses that represent these statuses rather than trying to type them in with the quotations and taking up a bunch of time and possibly making mistakes. So I'm going to use the addresses, and the question here, first of all, that you need to ask is, what are you testing? I am testing the amount of tickets sold. What is the criteria that I am testing it against? I am testing it against the seat capacity. And we're only going to focus here on this first row. So here we go. We go equal if, and we have 3 options, so we know that we need at least 2 logical tests. So I want to know if the tickets sold is equal to seat capacity. And if that is true, then I want to display flight full, and I want to make that absolute. The next thing I want to do is, because I have 2 more options, I need to now ask another question or have another logical test. So this is now where in my false value, I add my nested if. So I go if again. If then the tickets sold is less than the seat capacity, this time, if this is true, then I want to display space available. And again, I want to use absolute cell references to freeze that. So those are my 2 logical tests, my 2 value if trues. My last option is automatically going to be my false option, and I want to freeze that as well. I count how many ifs I have, 1, 2, and I close off my if function with my 2 parentheses and hit enter. And there we go. We had space available. And remember, I used the magic of my autofill, and I double click, and automatically my entire column has been filled out. So I hope this was helpful for you understanding the nested if function. If you did not understand something, just hit the replay button and watch this lesson all over again.